Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We started this sort of like HYTORC podcast with the idea of being able to dive into a variety of subjects. So we did things like training. We started talking about the washers and fasteners, a little bit about mining, and we want to kind of take that on and jump into the wind industry. But before we get into this, just take a minute, introduce yourself, tell us what you do.
Sure. I've been with HYTORC for about 18 years. I've been in the wind industry for 22 years. Worked for one of the OEMs prior to coming to work for HYTORC, technician, safety manager, that type of thing.
Okay. And now, jumping into the wind industry, and with obviously the experience you have, I'm just going to take a guess that you know what you're doing in there a little bit. What would you say is one or some of the biggest challenges you see?
Well, in wind, there's a lot of challenges. Some of it's having space to get in as far as bolting goes, space to get in to actually torque a bolt, accuracy and having, all the bolts tightened the way they're supposed to be, because when they're not, bad things can happen.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about efficiency, safety, reliability. The challenges you're seeing in there, how do those impact that?
Well, as far as the challenges, anytime there's a challenge, it raises the safety factor. And there's problems in the bolting part of the turbine. It could be fit, could be getting inside something, could be finding a reaction point. And it seriously affects the safety of every job.
Every time you go onto a site, is there like a common problem that you see? That it doesn't matter who it is, it's like you typically walk in, you're like, okay, that's the usual thing we're dealing with.
Well, one of the issues is when they ask you to come out to the site, it's because they're trying to, torque a bolt that they haven't been on before, and they can't figure out how to get it tightened. Sometimes it's just a cup fixture. Sometimes it's engineering a brand new tool for an application, because once the turbine's in the field, you can't really change the application. Yeah. We have implemented the HYTORC washer on several applications that have really made it simplified, faster, and obviously, most importantly, safer, because it gets rid of the reaction arm. Yeah. Helps with the weight of the tool. I mean, the bolts are getting bigger, torque values are getting higher. Yeah. It means the tools are getting bigger.
What is if obviously they should all be using HYTORC, but let's say they're not. What are they doing typically? Is it literally a wrench that they're using and a hammer? Is it?
It used to be. When I went 20 plus years ago, there was some applications we used a hammer wrench on. And now, they want to know that the torque value that the engineers are requiring is being reached. And the documentation side of the business has really come a long way. There's certain OEMs and certain contractors that are requiring some sort of documentation of every job that's done.
Gotcha.
And most of the critical path jobs are the ones that are requiring documentation.
Gotcha. And if somebody is whatever sort of like, we'll call it the outdated method, if they're continuing to do that, what are the common problems that are going to happen over that?
You can, if you're doing it with a hammer wrench, which there's probably not anybody doing that anymore. But if you are, I mean, turbines can come apart. If all your bolts aren't tightened to the right load and the same all the way around, you can lose a blade. The turbine could actually, come apart, fall over.
Now, is downtime a big issue
It's a huge issue. If it's down, it's not producing.
Yeah.
And so anytime that they have to shut down the turbine or it faults out for whatever reason, they're losing money.
What are some common reasons that downtime would occur?
It could be anything from a battery on a pitch for the blade being drained, some kind of emergency stop, or if they're having issues with, I've seen issues where bolts have actually broke, and they find a bolt in half laying on the ground, and you got to shut the turbine down and figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Is there a common reason that happens?
There's a lot of reasons. It could have been over tightened, could have been one that all the bolts weren't evenly tight and it was wearing as the turbine ran and snapped the bolt off. There's several different reasons that could happen.
And then when dealing within the wind industry in general, what is that like ideal bolting solution for them?
The ideal bolting solution, well, obviously it's the HYTORC washer, and the HYTORC washer, the full documentation tooling, whether it be the battery tools or whether it be the documentation pump, that would be an ideal solution. You would have documentation on every bolt. You would know exactly what load was put on each bolt, and it would be hands-free.
Now, how has that experience been when you show somebody like the washer for the first time and documentation for that first time?
They're very interested in it. Just like anything, new things some people are skeptical about. And with the washer, obviously there's some engineering processes you have to go through, testing and all that. But overall, it's a very good reaction to seeing the technology. And most of the time when they see the documentation, they think, that's definitely something they should use.
Awesome. And what are some of like the best practices that somebody should use in terms of like safety and efficiency?
Well, everything comes down to training.
Yeah.
We do a lot of training classes, and you can't use a tool safely and efficiently if you don't know how to use the tool. So I think it all starts with the training, and then bringing in some of these other technologies that may not be there yet. Yeah. The hands-free or the cup fixture, reaction fixtures that we have. But really the training is where it all starts, learning how to use the tools properly.
Awesome. And then do you have an example, don't have to name names, but an example of like a success story where we went in and fixed some problem and then the HYTORC washer, let's say, was just the ultimate solution that fixed that?
Well, we've had several. I actually have one that we did in a presentation not long ago. There was an application that they couldn't reach anything to react off of, but the bolt had to be tightened. Yeah. It wasn't a lot of bolts on this particular turbine, but I think it was 6 or 8 per turbine on this application. And so we were able to go in with the HYTORC washer and completely alleviated the problem that they were having. And obviously it made it safer because they were going to have to reach, I don't know, 2 feet away to catch anything to react off of. And it just was almost impossible to do the application.
And then have you seen a sort of the difference? Now they start using, let's say, HYTORC products with the washer and everything. Have you seen a difference in like that it's led to the turbine being up and running longer, let's say, or less maintenance having to be done?
Yeah, they're still running tests on the less maintenance. It does make construction faster. And as they run these turbines, because they just started really adopting the washer maybe a couple of years ago, heavy. And what they do is they run the tests, and after so many years and checking the bolts, they haven't moved. Then they can move the maintenance cycle out 6 months, a year, or even longer.
Do you see that becoming obviously we want that, but you see that becoming sort of the standard where it's like now they adapt to this and they go, okay, well, that allows us to extend it. So why wouldn't we all just be doing that?
I think so. It's like anything. Whenever something new comes in, it takes a little while for people to start using it, and then you start using it, and then you see more benefits because the longer you use it, the more benefits you see. And so I do see it being a standard in the future, both in wind and across all industries, really. Yeah.
And then if somebody, they hear what you say and they go, okay, that sounds great, but I'm already using some other company. What sets HYTORC apart?
Well, as far as the washer goes, there's not really anybody else out there that that has the technology that we have. There's some that are starting to spin off, but you know, when they say they have a way of doing something already, it's kind of like I refer back to when we used to use the hammer wrench.
Yeah.
You know, if we hadn't have changed, we'd still be using a hammer wrench to tighten up the bolts, and you know, who knows what would happen there.
And what's that first step that somebody goes, okay, great, well, I'll work with HYTORC. Do you typically recommend they do something like they get like almost a lunch and learn kind of thing, a demo on site? Yeah,
we can do any of those. We do lunch and learns all the time. We do demos on site. We set up testing if a company has a facility where a lot of their engineers are, and they say we want to run tests on these before we use them. Then we'll supply the washers for the test, and they can run the test. We can facilitate the test here if they would like to. They're welcome to come in with us while we're testing here at the facility in Mahwah. Or we've had them that say, hey, we want a set of washers for this application, and we want to run the turbine for X amount of time. Yeah. And so we'll supply it. We'll manage or help them install the washers, make sure it's all done properly, and then they'll run it for however long it is their test needs to be.
That's amazing. And then we talked, one last thing I wanted to ask about, we talked about like kind of a success story. Do you have sort of the opposite of that where you say all hell broke loose?
Well, I've seen, and the investigations are still out there, but I've seen a lot of things happen. And, there's no way to really say that it was specifically this particular component or this particular thing. But when things go bad, whether it's for bolting or other reasons, it gets real bad because you've got a turbine that's 300 feet in the air with tons of material on top of it, and when it comes down, it's a pretty bad thing.
Yeah, it's honestly sometimes almost deceiving. Like you see a turbine and you're like, well, it's not that big, and then
all you get up beside it.
Well, you know what really opened my eyes is one day I was watching a video of a truck carrying just one blade on a highway, and I'm like, that must be just an extra large turbine. It's like, no, it's a standard size. Yeah. It just completely blew my mind. And then you see a field of them, and you're like, yeah, all these have to be held together properly.
Yeah.
And I would imagine in that case, the torque accuracy, especially across every single blade on there and everything. I mean, if anything's off,
yeah, exactly.
You're talking about, it's like when you get your tires lined in the car. It's like, that feeling when you're driving, and I'm like, why is the whole car wobbling? And I'm like, I imagine that in that size, that's got to be terrifying.
It is, and because you drive down the road, like you say, it's got to be balanced. It's the same way with the blades and everything else on the turbine, because if it's not constantly moving, you're not making money. Mm-hmm. So you're not generating electricity, and so it's very imperative to have every bolt exactly loaded like it needs to be. But not just that, but every one of them be exactly the same all the way around the flange or the blade or whatever application you're on. It's pretty imperative that happens. And, by using high torque tools, whether it be the battery tools or the hydraulic tools, with accuracy, calibration, it's very important.
And then speaking of tools, what is typically the go-to in that?
Well, that's kind of changing now with the technology of the batteries. It's really moving towards that. Mm-hmm. There's still a lot of applications where you have to use the hydraulics, and now we have the battery over hydraulic, so you don't even have to plug it into the wall, and that's moving forward very fast, because if you can take a battery gun like this instead of having to take a pump and hoses and plug it into the wall and all that. It makes the job so much. Number one, it makes it quicker. You don't have to haul that up. Number two, it makes it safer because you don't have all of that with you. And number three, it just makes it easier on the technician.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine, especially I've seen. I also just like the way these look, but I would imagine I've seen the like the ladder that you're climbing up inside these things and the spaces you're working in. And I'm like, it's so constrained. I feel like
It
that,
is.
you know, one of these in your hand is so much better than being like, well, I have this tool in my hand, but I also have to take the whole pump with me, hoses with me. I have to then plug it in somewhere.
Yeah, and you know, when you take the tools up tower, you put them in a bag and you hook them to a winch.
Yeah.
Depending on what turbine it is, it's inside or outside. And so you know, the less things you have to put in that bag, the easier it is to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that was the last question I honestly had. So
Okay.
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right.